Hello, this is Mark Smith with Family Tree Counseling Associates, and I'm going to be speaking with you today on the subject of your marriage is haunted. One of my associates, Andy Holzman, who's been working together with me since about 1991, and we had also worked together previously at an agency. He is a cartoonist and he holds comic book conventions about once a month as a hobby and a business. And he had a friend of his, a cartoonist, a professional cartoonist named Craig Baldwin, who's one of the originators of the Archie comic books. If you're anywhere as close as old as me, you know about Archie and Jughead and Veronica and I forget the other one's name. But this is the cartoon that Mr. Boldman made for Andy. And let me get it up here where you can see it. So it has a couple sitting on a therapist's couch, but in the background there's a pirate and there's a guy with a machine gun, and there's a clown, and there's a big shot, and there's a saint or an angel floating around. So there's all kinds of characters from previous generations that are sort of lurking in the background, and I just loved that cartoon. I just thought it was brilliant, and it really does express how we as therapists understand and see people's marriages when they're sitting in front of us. We don't see two people. We see generations of characters. And we really cannot begin the therapy process without first not only getting to know you, we got to get to know the whole room full of those characters. We need to know about your dad and your mom, and we need to know about your grandparents. That's usually about as far back as we go, unless there's some compelling story, and many times there is, about a great grandparent coming over from another country or some such thing, or having been notable in some way. So we spend the first two sessions getting to know not only your family background, but the family background of your spouse, because we have to know them before we can really do you a good service. There's many therapists, and I don't understand it. They start in on their brand of therapy without even asking about your parents or your grandparents. What we do is we take one piece of paper, it's called a genogram or a family tree, and on that we record all of that information. And we want to find out about your siblings. Your siblings is very important in understanding you and understanding your story. Certainly your children, certainly any previous marriages or previous really significant relationships, and your kids, your work life, your friends, your hobbies, your pets. I mean, that we got to get to know you. And so a therapist that launches into that, I think, is sort of thrashing around in the dark with a lot of conjecture and guesses and stereotypes and maybe even their own projections. And I just don't think that would be very helpful. So now, when somebody comes into therapy, usually they only see one person in the room, and that's their bad acting spouse. Their spouse who is the problem that they brought with them, many times with the agenda of fix them, doc, but they are blinded to their own issues and the multi-generational factors that formed both them and their spouse. Tell you a little bit about my family background, just to normalize this for you just a little bit here. I have a great grandfather who was a bigamist, and both a great grandmother on one side of the family and a grandmother on the other side who spent a good deal of their adult lives in psychiatric facilities. Had a couple of raging, controlling grandfathers, and a whole bunch of poverty-stricken Pennsylvania hillbillies. Then I had my mother, who was a rager and a controller, and somebody who had a lot of instability in her life. Somebody who was a bit of a rescuer. Sometimes we'd show up to Thanksgiving dinner, and there'd be some bum at the table we'd never met before, and they were a little straggly looking, and it just didn't feel very safe. It felt like we didn't have family boundaries. It felt uncomfortable to us. Mom had a food addiction. Dad was sort of a passive, codependent fellow, and he had a gambling addiction. He was a conflict avoider, and his big addiction was playing bridge. He was almost a professional bridge player. He was a life master. So when somebody says bridge, I hear alcoholic, because it was an addiction for him. And he also was not good with money and was sort of a TV-aholic as well. So that was my family background. And so here's the thing. You think, man, that therapist knows a lot, but he comes from a crazy family. My family is pretty normal and probably isn't too far in terms of emotional health level from yours, because everybody's got a whole bunch of stuff in their family background. They've got a whole bunch of ghosts haunting the marriage. You think it's just the two of you, and it's not just the two of you. It goes back for generations. And it's so interesting to gather the information and then to piece it together. When people that are in sort of a combative, reactive relationship, they don't think about how their childhood impacted and affected them. So my favorite poet is a guy named David Whyte. White with a Y instead of an I. He's a British fellow, and he's brilliant, and he talks a lot about emotional issues. And here's a little snippet of a poem of his from his book, The House of Belonging. And it says, "All the true vows are secret vows. The ones we speak out loud are the ones we break." And I tell you what, there is an awful lot of broken vows because they're made by 23-year-olds who don't have the slightest clue who they are. They don't have the slightest clue who they're marrying. They don't have the slightest clue where they came from. They don't know what love is. They don't know what real marriage is. And they're the ones making the commitment. So do you think all the generations of poverty and psychiatric issues and poverty-stricken hillbillies and rage and control and addiction might have impacted me just a little bit as I stood at the altar when I was 22? I didn't have a prayer of having a healthy, intimate, connected marriage that lasted 50 years. I didn't have a prayer, and neither do you. And virtually very, very, very few people in our culture have a prayer of having that because they're just too unhealthy. So in every marriage, virtually every marriage in our culture, one of two things happen, or both. Either it blows up like a bomb going off in the marriage, somewhere between ages about 33 and 48 is when that happens. And every day in my office, I'm dealing with shell-shocked people because a bomb went off. And the bomb could be an affair. It could be an addiction. It could be somebody just waking up and saying, I don't love you anymore. It could be rage. Um, it could be a lot of different things, but it's always painful. Or sometimes people just run out of gas. They just aren't close. They don't talk. They don't make love. They're not best friends. They just drift apart and they just run out of gas. So let me ask you this. What kind of characters are lurking around in your family background? Because I'll bet you there are some characters that had some issues, some addictions. One of the most powerful things that I see in family of origin work and marital work is suicide. When there's a suicide, it just ripples down through the generations, and it's really the most powerful thing that I see. But let me go through a list of pretty common characteristics in families. You know what I get a lot is I get people coming in, they're saying, first of all, they come in and their marriage is just crazy. You know, it's really dysfunctional. You know, somebody's had an affair and somebody has an addiction, and they sit there and snarl at each other. And they tell me wicked stories of awful things. And then I ask them about their family of origin. They say, well, I grew up with Beaver Cleaver and his parents, Ward and Jude. And I say, no, you didn't. I guarantee you didn't grow up with the beef. You didn't. And they look at me funny, like, yeah, I did. You know, but if you married crazy, you grew up with crazy. If you married emotional cutoff, you grew up with emotional cutoff. As little kids, we don't know the difference because we're too close to the forest to really even see the trees. And all we know is all that we've ever known. So let me, and having dysfunction in your family is normal. That just makes you normal. I get people all the time that come in, they tell me all these stories, and I say, you know, you're normal. You know, that's what normal is. So did you have a parent that was critical or had very high expectations? Did you have a parent that was real controlling? See, what happens is people, they have a loyalty to their parents and they don't want to think negatively about their parents, but there's nothing wrong. We're just trying to get to what's true. We're not trying to blame anybody for anything. We are trying to name what in fact did happen with you in your family growing up. So many times parents are controlling, and you don't realize how controlling you are because you never really challenged them, because you were scared to challenge them. Was there emotional distance growing up in your family, which I would call abandonment? And people say, well, my dad never left. My mom never left. I wasn't abandoned. Yeah, you were. If one parent was drinking and the other parent was at work, or one parent was just busy all the time and there wasn't an emotional connection, you absolutely positively were abandoned. Was there any addictions in your family? Was there a divorce? And I'm not saying divorce is necessarily the root of all psychological problems. With many families that I work with, they're not getting divorced, but what they are doing is subjecting their kids to a harmful, toxic, dysfunctional marriage. And those kids will grow up and they will have that marriage. It will be reenacted. So it takes two people to fix a marriage. And if it doesn't get fixed, whether you get divorced or whether you don't get divorced, you're still damaging the kids equally as much. So what about, were there any favorites? So-and-so was the favorite and you weren't, or you were the favorite. Any kind of abuse, poverty. Poverty is huge because people get on a mission to try to make some money, or they have insecurities and they marry out of emotional needs related in financial wounds. Was there rage? Were there any suicides? Was there any mental illness? Early deaths is huge. You know, if you have a parent die when you're very young, That's very significant and very painful. Um, any chronic illnesses, any siblings who were particularly troubled and problematic and snatching all the attention away, any attempts to have parents rescue people too much. I mentioned my mom's rescuing. Depression, was there a parent that was depressed? Uh, was there like 7 kids in your family? There was in mine. I was one of 7. I was second, and that was a dysfunctional family right from the get go because there are just too many kids. Um, or just like I said, a lack of emotional closeness. If you said no to all those things, you, my friend, are clueless. And you're either lying to yourself or in make believe. Because there's not a family in this country who you can say doesn't have at least one of those. Most families have most of them, frankly. That's the truth. Or many of those things on that list. So we tend to, in our John Wayne independent culture, we tend to underplay or discount the importance of heritage. That sets the stage for your issues, your problems, addictions, and failings. And that's one of the most beautiful things about getting in recovery for your issues is you learn who you are and where you came from, and you reduce your shame level because you understand I came by my craziness and my dysfunction and my addiction. I came by it fairly and honestly. And it's not that I'm a screw up. It's not that I'm a piece of crap. The reason why I do what I do. I do what I do because I came into it, for a reason. So I do have my fair share of issues, and I talk about them openly, but I'm not ashamed of them because I grew up in a wounded, abandoned, large, dysfunctional family, and I do come by my stuff honestly. All you can do is recognize it. That's what I call recovery. Recognize your issues and work on it as effectively as you possibly can. Everybody knows what a recovering alcoholic is, just an alcoholic that goes to AA and they quit drinking and they admit they're an alcoholic. Well, just about everybody in our culture needs to be in recovery for something, some kind of addiction or codependency, being too passive, or many times people who are too controlling or too critical themselves. So when I was a teenager, my senior year, I believe it was my junior year, the Roots came out, the movie Roots. And there was one particularly powerful scene, I thought, and that was Kunta Kinte was down in the marketplace where they would sell slaves. And he would see the slaves that had been there for years already. And he looked around, and just by looking at them, he could tell, were they Mandinkas, or he could tell exactly what tribe they came from and who their people were. But these people had been here for so many years, they didn't know who they were and they didn't know where they came from. And that's why Kunta Kinte made such a commitment to tell his stories so it would be passed down from generation to generation, to give his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren pride in who they were and where they came from. And it's just like that in our world today. People don't know who they are, they don't know where they came from, and they don't know how that impacts their issues and their marriage. So we try to help you figure out why Mother Nature has put you with who they put you with, because you are definitely married to exactly the right person. And you're in this marriage for Mother Nature to try to heal you, and you're going to pick somebody, frankly, who is a very cleverly disguised version of the people who hurt you the most growing up. That's what love is. Love is picking somebody like the people who hurt you the most, which is usually your mother and your father. So when people come in, we don't see it as a marital problem. We see it as two people with unresolved issues with that group of characters that are haunting you in your background. So the pain of your marriage is actually your best shot at you fixing you and learning about yourself and healing the wounds of your childhood. So the marriage really isn't the problem, it's the cure. So don't run away from your marital pain. Embrace it, because the universe is trying to communicate with you and trying to teach you about who you are and where you came from. We can help you do that. So thank you for watching today, and encourage you to join our channel, Family Tree Counseling, on YouTube. My phone number and email address are on the screen. You can text me, call me, email me. There are books. I have 5 ebooks about this concept of recovery and marital issues on our website, and that's familytreecounseling.com. So get to know the cast of characters in your family of origin and get busy working on them. And God bless you. Thank you for watching today.